Hello and welcome to the Mobalytics patch 11.19 tier list. Once again, I'm Aux Harrison. We had a ton of changes on the last patch and we're starting to see them settle, but we do have another bunch of champion changes to tweak the aftermath. Let's jump straight in and discuss what's been changing. So for top lane, in the God tier we have Tahm, Sett and Garen, and in the S tier we have Dr. Mundo, Lilia, Malphite, Mordekaiser, Nasus, Urgot, Wukong and Yorick. We haven't seen a ton of major changes in the top lane this patch. Kennen did get his Q toned down, which will hit his laning and trading power, but he'll still be a monster if he gets to teamfights. Poppy got a buff to a passive cooldown, and honestly she's a pretty good pick into most top laners with dashes like Aurelia, so you can shut down the mobility with a W and it just stops them in their tracks. Renekton got a pretty sizable buff. He really suffered from the change to his W, but he's getting a substantial health increase and the lockout on his W was reduced, so although he's not expected to be particularly strong at low elo, they are trying to make him at least playable. Mordekaiser was already in a decent place, but got a solid buff to his E, with his cooldown level 1 being reduced by 4 seconds. This allows you to pose further threat in the laning phase, but on top of that, it's also one of your best abilities to escape from ganks, as you can use it to drag your enemies backwards as you're running away. While its power comes from his incredible dueling ability thanks to his ultimate. The range of stats it steals makes it very difficult to take you on, but also the fact you can isolate a target is very effective into engage compositions. Ulting champions like Malphite, Rakan or Hecarim forces them into a 1v1 against you where they can't provide the engage potential their team needs. It's great at shutting down dive compositions. Aatrox got a really substantial buff. 6 seconds was wiped off his W cooldown at level 1, and since he maxes it last, you'll feel this benefit for most of the game. Similar to Mordekaiser, who was already in a decent spot, but with this change it basically allows you to threaten with your combos significantly more frequently in lane. It goes without saying, Gordrink and Sterix are both really strong at the moment, and the item combo serves Aatrox extremely well, so you can increase the healing from Gordrinker with your ult active. Shogath got a change which seems somewhat minor at first glance, but actually is pretty solid. It's a 1 second cooldown reduction on his Q, taking it from 7 to 6 seconds. The thing is, it's such a critical ability for Cho'Gath, and with an already short cooldown, shaving a second off makes a big difference. A lot of your trades will be dictated by whether or not you hit this, and the impact if you do is massive, as not only do you get the knock up and damage, but the slow allows you to easily follow up. Cho'Gath was already in a pretty good spot, but this little edge will really be appreciated. Onto the jungle. In the God tier we have Jarvan, Trundle and Amumu, and in the S tier, Echo, Fiddlesticks, Master Yi, Nocturne, Rammus, Vi, Warwick and Zac. Jungle received minimal changes. One thing is that the Predator buff we saw last patch really didn't make as much of a difference as we expected, and Skarner and Gragas didn't even really adopt the rune. Gragas is getting a minor buff this patch, but ultimately he's just not performing well at lower ranks. Sejuani got a nice buff to a Q cooldown of 2 seconds, but it's not a massive game changer. Qiyana got a big buff to a jungling, but this is likely to only impact things at higher elo. She's in C tier at lower ranks, and even with the buff, it's unlikely she'll move up higher as her win rate is atrocious. Amumu has not been nerfed. I am really unsure as to why not, as he's performing insanely well, but you should absolutely abuse him while you can, as for the time being he is completely dominating at lower ranks. The fact you can now Q ult Q leaves very little room for your opponents to do anything. The fact you have a second Q as well means you aren't punished so hard if you miss the first one. Amumu works really well with AP teammates who can capitalize on his passive. Examples like Ziggs are great as you essentially hold them still and allow him to easily land his burst while also doing 10% extra damage. Amumu's early game is still punishable, but if you make it into the mid game it's easy sailing for the most part. Lily is in a really good spot. She has a really healthy clear thanks to her passive healing off her camps, and an extended skirmish so you can deal a ton of damage while skirting around her opponents. The ult is a hugely powerful teamfighting ability. Landing a big sleep is a great way to kick off a fight in your favour. Recently the cooldown on your E was reduced, and it essentially just allows you to more frequently hunt for picks on the back of it, as the slow is substantial enough to chase a target down even without your ultimate. Echo got a solid buff to his jungle clear. His passive now deals a huge amount of damage to monsters, just allowing you to speed through the jungle that much faster. Echo is frustrating to play against when ahead, as he's incredibly slippery with a huge amount of burst. Whenever a snowbally jungler is given a boost to their clear speed, it really helps, as essentially just makes it easier to accrue a lead on the back of farming. It's something we saw when Diana was firmly in the meta. When ganking with Echo, you're great at taking out low HP targets, but also any opponents who are overextended are extremely vulnerable to you setting up your W behind them for a potential stun. Onto the mid lane. In the God tier we have Yasuo, Akshan and Aurelia, and in the S tier we have Ahri, Anivia, Annie, Graves, Kayle, Lux, Malzahar and Sett. Mid saw minimal changes overall. Sylas got a nice buff to his base mana and mana regen, but is nowhere near the power level he was at prior to his W nerf. Fizz had all of his changes reverted, and then was given a buff to his ECD. Honestly, this is looking really good for him in the mid lane, as his ECD is essentially what he plays around in terms of burst damage and his mobility. Ryze did receive a pretty major nerf to his Q damage and E cooldown, but he's already really bad at lower ranks in solo queue, and so isn't even justified to be on anything above D tier. Yasuo is a terror at the moment in lower ranks. He's got a nearly 30% ban rate and is performing really well. You have a huge amount of threat onto most mid laners on the back of your wind wall and dash to get up close and cause issues for your lane opponent. Ideally, you want to play Yasuo when you have a team who can easily set up for big ultimates when it comes to team fights. This is especially important for your jungler as it makes ganks substantially easier. 2 items is a massive spike for Yasuo when you have 100% crit, but you continue to scale incredibly well into the later stages. Aurelia is a big pain for low elo players to go up against. Your all-in potential is super threatening if you can land a stun or ult, and most mages have to massively respect your ability to easily gap close and shred them down. Gold Drinker is a really popular item to build on Aurelia at higher elo, despite there being alternatives, simply because it makes you so bulky that you can teamfight really effectively and be a massive threat. A key thing when playing Aurelia is to look out for low HP minions you can dash onto to close the gap on your opponent to follow up with your stun and get a Blade Surge reset. Ideally, having a minion left available to dash back, which allows you to disengage again after you're done trading. Trinity is a new pick that we've been seeing a lot of popularity with in the hands of pro players recently, but it's still really potent at every elo. Essentially, the play pattern is pretty similar to top lane, but since this is in mid, you'll be facing more champions who aren't able to handle you in melee range, and so you can stack up your passive, dash in on them, and then sustain off your Q after the trade. It's really frustrating to play against, and if you get a lead, then you can easily dive on the back of your ultimate. Ghost is taken as a summoner because it increases your ability to chase down targets, and essentially the way you're playing it is you're banking on the fact that your mobility lets you stick to your target for long enough to kill them before your ult expires. Gale Force is great to help chase down your target and add the extra burst element to find all ins. Onto AD carries in the God tier with Misfortune, Ziggs and Vayne. In the S tier we have Ashe, Draven, Jhin, Sivir and Swain. The only AD carry change on this patch was Varus getting another nerf when he's already underwhelming at lower ranks, so won't be seeing too much of him. Seraphine is played a fair bit bot and got a buff to her ult cooldown, but it's not quite substantial enough to change your ranking as much as it is being nice. There is some knock-on effects from last patch's changes to talk about with the highlight picks however. Misfortune got a buff to the number of waves she fires out with her ultimate. This is basically just a damage increase, and particularly with Amumu and Jarvan being so powerful right now, there's a lot of setup to land a huge wombo combo. The laning is solid as you're able to consistently harass with your Q and E and can push in easily to threaten under the tower. One of the big underrated strengths of Misfortune is the free movement speed she gets. It's great for getting back to lane after resets, but also very effective at rotating around the map to make sure you're there for fights. Twitch got a really substantial buff last patch, adding even more AD to when he pops his ultimate. He still suffers from a weaker laning phase when he can be harassed and punished, but once you hit 6 your all-in potential is massive and he's one of the best scaling AD carries in the game. It's really difficult to deal with a fed Twitch, and the fact that you can roam with your stealth and easily find backline access to basically one-hit squishy champs is a big reason why he's so dominant at lower ranks. Last but not least, onto support. In the God tier we have Blitzcrank, Nami and Soraka, and in the S tier we have Brand, Leona, Morgana, Sona, Xerath, Zilean and Zyra. Support saw nerfs to Soraka and Sona. For Sona we saw a base armor reduced by 2 and some bug fixes. Ultimately this does hurt since she's already so squishy, but honestly Sona is so strong right now at lower ranks that this isn't enough to knock off from S tier. Soraka had an ult healing nerf to make up for the fact that it now removes grievous wounds. It is a pretty big hit because even though the number being reduced is small, it's amplified against low health targets and by healing increasing items, so it ends up adding up. That being said, Soraka is still insanely strong at the moment, and this allows you to use your ult more liberally just to remove grievous wounds. She's more than deserving to take the God tier spot from Sona. Blitzcrank is one of the best low elo performers right now. He's very polarizing, as if you consistently land in hooks that he can easily hard carry a game, as if you're grabbing the right targets it can easily result in them going down. Roaming is especially effective. If you can find a window to move mid, then you can snowball another lane beyond your own. With the power of enchanters like Soraka and Sona, Blitzcrank is a great answer to shut them down and keep them in an uncomfortable position in the laning phase. That being said, you have to be cautious as thrown out grabs on cooldown and not connecting completely gives up any threat or pressure and allows your opponents to either engage themselves or force you out of lane. Amumu is really good right now as a support, and in fact at higher elo he's played more in the role than in jungle. Thanks to your E passive, you're able to take a beating, especially with Aftershock to back you up. And the CC chain you can deliver is really frustrating to deal with. Q into R into Q can keep a target down for 3.5 seconds, and if the enemy carry doesn't have cleanse, they're not going to have a good time. On top of that, the bonus you give to magic damage means you pair really well with mages in the bot lane. Seraphine, Swain and Ziggs are all great mages you can play with bot lane to boost their damage and provide an insane CC chain that'll easily take out the enemy AD carry. Xerath is on the upper end of mages in the support role. The long range he offers in combination with his mana regen on his passive means essentially the enemy bot lane either has to find a way to engage on you or they'll get pummeled and poked out. Xerath is a bit of a precarious pick as you are squishy and your only form of peel is your stun, which stuns for less time when targets are closer, so it is critical that you maintain your distance and be aware of engaged threads. A big strength of Xerath is the range on his ultimate. Often you can move slightly towards mid lane and be in range to offer support if there's a fight going on. Looking out for moments when enemies are CC'd is ideal in order to guarantee that you connect. And that's it for this patch. Hopefully this has been helpful in getting you up to speed on the meta. If you're interested in seeing the full low-elo and high-elo list in one place, including seeing D tiers, then head on over to mobalytics.gg where you can get even more info including counters, builds, tips, combos and more. We've just updated our counters page, so be sure to check it out. See you next time and thanks for watching.